This is a Nancy Parker Endowment program, along with being sponsored by the Friends of Hedberg Public Library. I have to do a couple things. One thing, before I introduce Mike, and that's I have to give you a Friends commercial. I mean, the good news is I can tell by the turnout is that it is a writer's strike because nobody's home watching television. And so you're coming out to see real effective writing. That's what this is all about. The commercial is this. We're hoping all of you would consider, if you're not already a friend, if you are a friend, thank you for coming back and rejoining us for 2008. This is our membership drive program. And we're hoping that you all recall, you all know that a lot of the things we do here, we're a group that loves this place. And that's why a lot of you are here too, and why you come here so often. And we spend a lot of time volunteering, but we give donations, and you don't have to do all that. We come up with things like strollers and shopping carts you see around the library, and prizes for summer reading programs, books on CD, book materials for our Spanish-speaking citizens. There's a lot of things we do, and we're asking you to become a part of that. And also, don't forget that we've got a fabulous bookstore, coffee shop downstairs called the Ground Floor, and that's another one of our gems that we have, and we invite you to be a part of that. And if you can volunteer, help us out, that's great too. So anything you do, please join us. We appreciate that. I'm going to introduce now our author, Michael Perry, Mike Perry. Intriguing fellow, isn't he? I think that our audience shows that tonight. From New Auburn, Wisconsin, and I guess if you're thinking Wisconsin, right, a little fine little thing here, about right up there, right, north of Chippewa Falls, 53. He's been writing his whole life, as I understand it, and he's had some essays published and things. Came back to run a pig farm, of all things. And but of course, that was the life he grew up in, a real life he knew as a young man. And I think a lot of us relate to it. That's why so many of us are here tonight, because we can relate to that Wisconsin rural background, and also just Wisconsin, right? This man's books tell us a lot about that. He's famous, of course, for Population 485. I know a lot of you have a copy of that. I said it right, too, because I used to say Population 411, things like that, but it's 485. Meeting Your Neighbors, one siren at a time, is that right? Did I say that right? And what a fabulous book. Touched the lives of many of us here. And just briefly, my best friend, Dave, who lives in Oregon, Wisconsin, quite a Renaissance man himself like Mike, and he was so inspired by Population 45, he is now a volunteer firefighter and rescue squad worker in Oregon, Wisconsin. And he wanted to be here tonight, Mike, but he couldn't make it. Anyway, so that's one thing. Of course, we're also showing here Truck, a Love Story, which is the title itself has got me hooked, okay? Whether it be the truck itself or a love story, everybody wins in that book. And if you've read it, you know you will too. I should mention that I was just talking to some folks here that Truck, a Love Story, Michael's last book, is a winner of the 2007 Banta Award from the Wisconsin Library Association. It also, and I think this is an amazing honor, he's also been picked as the Midwest Booksellers Association Best Booksellers Choice Award. That's an amazing thing. Like, the choice of the readers out there choosing that. And just found out today that Michael's won the R.R. Donnelly Award, which is, again, a Wisconsin Library Association award that honors Wisconsin authors for this year. So congratulations to him on that. We're here to see him, the wit and wisdom and the character of the great Michael Perry. So welcome, Michael.
Thanks. Can everybody hear okay in the back there? You all right? All right. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm just going to kind of skip around. I'll talk a little bit about the books. I'll read a little bit from the books. I'll also read a couple of things strictly for my own entertainment. And I'll try to take some questions at the end as well. I'm going to start out with the same story I start all my speaking engagement with. I told this story already this afternoon out at the university, but it's a story from the book Population 485, and Population 485 is that old Can You Go Home Again book. It's been written many times by many people, many different ways, and in my book, the way that I rediscovered my hometown was by joining the local volunteer fire and rescue service. And ever since that book has come out, I've received a number of emails and letters from folks saying, gosh, we just loved your book about the small town, and we liked it so much that we've sold everything and we're moving back. I'll say, well, hang on there, Spanky. because the truth is that small towns can also be difficult places. They have long memories, and you can be 50 years old trying to live down something that happened when you're 15. And even when you're in the position I was, in which you're going back by choice and looking forward to it, you still don't know how it's going to go. When I went back to New Auburn, I'd been away for 12 years, and I was not the same guy as I was when I left. I like to say when I left New Auburn, I was a farm boy, a good student, and a fair defensive end. I came back 12 years later, a long-haired writer with soft hands and a nursing degree. There was a certain amount of street cred to recover with some of my buddies in the coon hunting crowd. And I've since had to update the anecdote specifically as it relates to the long hair. For years I had long hair, waist length. There are two reasons I no longer have all that long hair, and the first is just sadly generalized crop failure. It really got to the point where there was no point, and it had gotten real thin on top, was still real long in the back, and I thought, I probably really ought to cut it off. I'm kind of headed for the Ben Franklin look here, but I hadn't really made the move, and we got paged out to fight a grass fire, and I was right up in the teeth of the flames, knocking it down, fighting from the black, as any well-trained wildland firefighter will tell you that you must. But I was right up in there, and all of a sudden one of the other firefighters ran up and started patting me. Now normally you don't get a lot of that. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Man, your hair's on fire." And indeed it was. So at that point I figured, if it ain't falling out, it's just bursting into flames. I'm going to cut it off. And Mom likes it better this way anyway. But anyway, so when I moved back to New Auburn, I was always looking for signs to see whether or not I'd made the right decision. And the story that I like to tell, that's in the book, is that the biggest event of the year in New Auburn, population 485, is Jamboree Days. And Jamboree Days consist basically of a 5-minute parade and a softball tournament. And the proceeds from the softball tournament go to support the local volunteer fire service, of which I'm a member, and so we're expected to pitch in and help run things. And so the other thing you need to know is that directly adjacent to the softball field is a beer tent. And truth be told, that's where the majority of your hardcore fundraising occurs. And we have to run the beer tent too. And we only have one softball field, and at the time of this anecdote there were no lights on the softball field. And so in order to get all the teams through the brackets, they have to start playing softball at 8 a.m. on Saturday morning. They play all day long until the tournament has, until dark. And then they resume play at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning and play all day long until the tournament has been resolved. And so about a year after I moved back, I was instructed to go down to the beer tent on Sunday morning and clean it up and get it ready for the day. And I got sent down there with one of the old timers on the department. And so we get down there. It is 8:30 a.m. on Sunday morning. First softball game of the day is already underway. And we're picking up paper plates and plastic cups and napkins. And this guy wanders in off the street. Not a softball player, just a civilian. And he says, "Can I get a beer?" And I looked at my partner and I said, "Well, you've been on the department for 30 years. You make the command decision here." But I said, "It is 8:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning." And he said, "Well, I guess there's no law against it." So he goes around behind our little makeshift bar there and he draws the guy a beer and he sets it down, and the guy hands his money over and he puts his elbows on the plywood and he raises the beer to his lips, and he's just about to take a pull at the foam when he hears the crack of the bat on the softball field adjacent, and he freezes. And then he looks, and then he brings his lips back in line with the beer, which has not moved, and says, "A little early in the morning for softball." And it was at that point that I said, "Yes, I am back among my people." Many years ago, when I was first kind of trying to do this writing thing, I started writing stories for a little local regional magazine, and I wrote these stories about a fictitious little town called Foggy Crossing, Wisconsin. And then I went on to start performing these live and eventually recorded them on a little live humor CD. And I'd like to read to you tonight the first, the introduction to Foggy Crossing. Foggy Crossing is a fictitious town, doesn't really exist, but I think you might recognize some of your neighbors. Foggy Crossing is a small town. It's what some folks call a blink town. Blink and you miss it. It's got 4 bars, 4 churches, and just enough sinners to keep them all in business. Things in Foggy Crossing run about 20 years behind schedule, but that's the way folks like it. Far from being backward, however, your average Foggy Crossing citizen knows a lot of things no big city person ever knew. Things like, if you're pulling a manure spreader, never switch the beaters on till you're headed into the wind. Or things like, never pay top dollar for a milk cow referred to by the previous owner as Old Three Faucet. Or things like, if you can see your breath, don't lick the pump handle. And never, ever stand behind a sneezing cow. You see, says Foggy Crossing's leading agronomist, Buford Spindle, you got your cow and you got your sneeze, and of course you got some variables in between. Basically, it's a situation involving several of the properties of physics, like contents under pressure, ballistics, and the path of least resistance. And of course, inertia, although in this case you might refer to it as inertia. Winter in Foggy Crossing can get pretty nasty. Lots of snow and lots of cold. And not just to put a skin of ice on the cow tank cold, says local resident Harvey Bungle. No, sir, this is thermometer warping, fur thickening, tongue stuck to the pump handle cold. Cold where 0 degrees is just a warm and fuzzy memory. Cold that'll frost up your mustache, just like it does dear old mom's. I found out the hard way that if you do that joke on Wisconsin Public Radio, the next morning Mom called. She didn't deny it. Some of the locals view the cold as an asset. Keeps out the riffraff, says Oscar Volsrud. Oscar tends to keep to himself and views anyone from outside a 6-mile radius of his farm as foreign, probably a communist or a hippie. Because Wisconsin winters can be so nasty, the folks in Foggy Crossing tend to look forward to summer. And when it comes, they soak it up, spend a lot of time in it. Till the mosquitoes hatch, that is, which is about 1 week out of spring. Then everybody complains about how hot and muggy it is and how bad the skeeters are. And won't it be great when fall comes and it's cold again? Wisconsin's state animal is the concrete deer lawn ornament. The fiberglass Holsteins come in a close second. Wisconsin's got more deer and cows per square mile than just about every state in the Union, and yet everybody roars around buying deer and cows made out of cement and fiberglass and sticks them in their front lawn to mow around. The last week in November around Foggy Crossing is reserved for a hallowed holiday tradition that has been handed down from generation to generation. Schools shut down, folks miss work, and people who normally wouldn't be trusted with a straw and a spit wad arm themselves with high-powered rifles and go deer hunting. Armies of folks who never walk further than from the TV to the fridge suddenly dress up in 45 pounds worth of flannel and blaze orange snowsuits, load themselves down with cartridge bandoliers, 10-pound hunting knives and assorted hunting gear, strap a rifle across their back, and charge off into the woods to have heart attacks and fall asleep in their tree stand. A good time is had by all, except those folks with concrete deer on their lawn. Wisconsin is known as the dairy state. Cholesterol is king. The 4 food groups are cheese, milk, beer, and cheese. Bowling is the state sport. That and church league dart ball. There's no bowling alley at Foggy Crossing, but Bixton, which is right down the road, has one. Foggy Crossing does have a regular dart ball league, and the competition is fierce, but never acrimonious. We have a fire department at Foggy Crossing, and last night they was called out to fight a chimney fire. Old Ferdy Blomquist figured he could let the chimney go one more year without cleaning it. Well, it's clean now. The fire department was a little delayed in arriving because Harvey Bungle spent 10 minutes trying to open the door to the fire hall with a key to his ice fishing shack. Metaphorically speaking, Harvey has spent most of his life pushing on a door marked pull. Last week, to help raise money for a new fire truck, the Lutheran Ladies Knitting Club raffled off an Afghan knit by Gertie Johnson. By the looks of the Afghan, Gertie's been forgetting to take her glaucoma medication again. That pretty much sums up Foggy Crossing. Stop in down to the cafe and you can discuss politics or pitchforks. The people you meet will look you in your eyes and shake your hand so you know it's been shook, and they'll probably offer you a cup of coffee before your pants hit the chair. And remember, in Foggy Crossing, nobody ever says goodbye. They just say, well, I suppose. There was a time, even within the scope of my memory, and I'm 42, when kids would look forward to the arrival of the J.C. Penney Christmas catalog. And nowadays, of course, you get 14 or 15 catalogs a week, but back then, as I recall, the Sears and J.C. Penney catalogs came 3 or 4 times a year, and the Christmas edition was extra thick, and it was stuffed with all these unattainable goodies. I know my brothers and I would always leave it lying around the house open to the go-kart page. We was relying on the power of suggestion, which frankly yielded diddly. We never did get a go-kart. We had to settle for giving each other rides in the barn cleaner, which is exciting in its own way. But saying, like most kids, my brothers and sisters and I look forward to the arrival of the J.C. Penney Christmas catalog, but we were farm kids. And so what we really looked forward to was the arrival of the American Breeders' Service Bull catalog. Now, if you're not familiar, the ABS catalog is basically Playgirl for cows. It's filled with page after page of photographs of the ultimate bulls. These are the Greek gods of the bovine world, and they always had these amazing 4-part names. I remember one of the popular ones when I was a kid was something 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 Belshazzar, right out of the Old Testament. They always had names like Golden Turkish Alfalfa Rocket. So we would we'd look these bulls over, my brothers and I, and we would we'd go through each one. In addition to the photographs, they had these charts of data that described each bull's specific attributes and the attributes that he caused to come about in the calves and the cows. I remember they had a category like rolling butterfat average, and they had one category called udder tilt. I remember we'd study that pretty close. But anyway, so we'd study all these bulls and their pictures and the data, and then we'd make a decision. We'd call Dad over and go, Dad, this bull here, Spanky Tango Cremora Blaster. He's the one for our cows. And of course, in retrospect, considering what I didn't know then about my parents' financial situation, I'm pretty sure Dad just went to the back of the catalog, to the discount section there, a bull in a bucket. And, just ordered the cheapest product available. But anyway, sometime within the next 8 hours, the artificial inseminator would arrive. And he would walk into the barn and commit astounding acts. When you're a kid growing up on a rural northern Wisconsin dairy farm with no television, the artificial inseminator is a combination science exhibit and freak show on wheels. And we never missed it. He'd roll into the yard with his pickup, and there in the back he'd have this little silver canister about the size of a beer pony, and it was filled with liquid nitrogen, and that's where the semen was stored, deep frozen. And he'd pull the lid off, and these wisps of mysterious fog would roll up and down the sides. And if he had time and he liked you, he'd let you take a piece of string and dip it in there in the liquid nitrogen, and when you pulled it out, you could snap it just like a twig. And then he'd extract this frozen semen, he'd put it into a little squeezy, syringy type deal, which he'd then attach to a long, slender pipette. And then, I don't know if this was standard procedure or just our guy's particular flair, but he'd then carry that crossways in his teeth. Because I remember we'd be waiting in the barn there, and he would step through the barn door backlit by the sun, and he'd had these big tall rubber boots on and this thing crossways in his teeth, and I was always reminded of a pirate boarding a ship. And I assume the cows felt similarly about it, because my dad would hang a tag behind the cow that he wanted service, and the inseminator would locate that tag and that cow, and he'd stop right behind the cow, and he would draw on this long shoulder-length plastic glove, and then he would step across the gutter and he'd grab the cow by the tail. And then I would say, if you don't know the rest, see me after class. And I can't say that the cows were ever visibly distressed by what certainly had to be a disruption in their day. There were only really two outward signs, and the first was that they would stop chewing their cud. They'd go. And then their eyes would bulge just a little, not a lot, just kind of like if you were walking down the street and you went, I was supposed to pay my taxes yesterday. Now, in addition to the bulls and their photographs, the ABS catalog also included beautiful black and white photographs of the cows that had been cast by these bulls. And if the bulls were the Greek gods of the bovine world, these cows were the Pamela Andersons of the bovine world. They left a farm boy slightly breathless. And it's been a long time since cows played a central role in my life, but they still occupy my thoughts. And so I had the opportunity once to write a description of my dream cow, and I'd like to share that with you now. There's no beginning and no end, it's just a description. And I'm from Chippewa County, so at the end I took the liberty of giving it one of them 4-part names. There was in Chippewa County a cow that would make you despair all other cows. A gloriously big-boned Holstein, deep in the forerib, long in the spine, and fronted with a brisket the lines of which brought to mind the prow of a felted barkentine. Her dewlap rose to a sturdy throat, which gave way to a sweeping jawbone, which attached to a generally trapezoidal skull, crowned with a bony pompadour. Her eyes were translucent brown dewdrops, the size of mallard eggs, fringed with delicate swaths of lash. Her nose, pebbled and moist, was the size of a large boxing glove. The nostrils, while large enough to admit an English sparrow each, were delicately drawn, and her breath, grassy with just a hint of hops, was not unpleasant. Astern, her sturdy, up-tilted tailhead rose from betwixt the twin thurls of an architectural backside, the tail itself dropping on a straight, clean line past her pin bones to her hocks, where it plumed and fluffed to a voluminous switch that whispered against her dew claws when she walked. Girthy but firm at 1,800 pounds, the Holstein stood 60 inches at the withers, poised on clean hooves and draped nose to heels in a tight-napped pelt the color of drift snow and coal tar. At the vertex of flank and thigh, her udder bloomed, a sculpted marvel, big as a bushel, firm as a block of butter, boldly veined, furred with clean white hair, the texture of toasted velour, and anchored by twin milk veins running the abdomen like woolly ropes. The teats, arranged about the four corners in a dignified quartet, were sturdy, but symmetrical and gracefully tapered. To press your cheek against this udder was to worship at the terminus of a genetic journey traceable to the Batavians and Frisians who first mingled their herds in the Rhine Delta around the time of Christ. This was a temple to butterfat, a shrine to calcium and cream, a ruminant Helen capable of launching 1,000 milk mustaches. This was a glorious, clover-fueled bovine dream. This was Chippewa's chipper princess, Turbaline. As I said, I don't have cows anymore, but my brother still farms, and he heard me read that once, and afterwards he said, "Stay out of my barn." This next piece, I debated a long time before deciding to share it in public. It's a deeply, deeply personal piece. In a very specific anatomical sense. And it's an essay that I wrote. It's included in a collection called Off Main Street. And this is a piece that I wrote originally for that bastion of literature, Men's Health magazine. I'm listed in the masthead of that magazine as a contributing editor. Nobody gets a bigger kick out of that than I do. I don't know if you're familiar with the magazine, but I'm not the guy on the cover. As I like to say, I haven't had an ab in my life. And if I did have an ab, I'm not certain that I would wax it. And I certainly don't have any sort of hair care or grooming tips for you, other than try to hang on to it. And certainly style has escaped me. And as I've had to explain to my mom, I'm not the guy who writes those 10 ways to turbocharge her love zone pieces. But they occasionally let me write pieces. And this is a piece that I wrote for Men's Health. And for the longest time, I just thought, you know, it's very personal, and I don't think I should share it in public. But then, the more I thought about it, I realized, and I did my research, that no matter where I read this, no matter the makeup of the audience, and whether it's a U.S. audience, or I've read this piece in Panama now, and I've read it in Germany, and I've read it all over the U.S., I've read it at the Overture Center for the Arts. I read it down at the Legion Hall in New Auburn for a bunch of farmers getting free lunch from the seed corn company. You know why farmers don't wear tennis shoes, right? Because the seed corn company ain't giving them away for free. But anyway, I did my research and I realized no matter who I read this to, 10% of the audience is down with me. And you know what? 10% is good enough for me. So I'd like to share with you an essay I wrote about my first ever kidney stone. That's my 10% right there. Those people. The stone struck on a Tuesday evening somewhere along I-94 just east of Minneapolis. First came an upper abdominal twinge, similar to gas pains at dawn, of the sort precipitated by excess bratwurst at bedtime. See, you read that little line there in Minnesota, it doesn't even get a chuckle. But you read it here and people go, oh yeah. Except that no amount of twisting or turning would break it loose. Then it seemed as if my right kidney had been run through with a superheated knitting needle. I was veering in and out of my lane, gasping like a scuppered carp. Struck by this delusion that a hot bath would dissipate the pain, I careened to a motel. I'm certain the desk clerk pegged me for a meth fiend. I was pallid, shivering, and rolling in sweat as she ran my credit card, but she worked quickly. I staggered to the room, filled the tub full blast, and stripped out of my clothes. By now, based on my experience as a nurse and an EMT, I had pretty much self-diagnosed. 1 in 10 Americans will experience the joy of kidney stones, and the pain I felt was my secret handshake into the club. I dropped into the steaming water and, drawing on my knowledge of anatomy, physics, and desperation, assumed a bizarre position calculated to roll the stone back into the kidney. I'd like to give you just a moment. After about 15 seconds of lying in scalding water with my butt hoisted above the plimsoll mark, I ran up the white flag and dialed 911. So this was in near Minneapolis, and so it was in Woodbury actually. And so the first person on scene was a cop paramedic, and he come busting into the room there, and I was on the bed exhibiting the 3 classic symptoms of a kidney stone. I was sweating profusely, I was writhing uncontrollably, and that's a real telltale sign. A lot of abdominal pain, you engage in what's called guarding, where you try to hold very still and you don't want anyone to bump you. But with kidney stones, it's a smooth muscle contraction issue, and so you try to get away from it and you just can't. You writhe and writhe. And then the third symptom is, I was cussing like a sailor. And that's actually quite unusual for me. I was not raised that way, and I try to avoid that kind of language unless I'm absolutely certain no one's listening. But a kidney stone really just sweeps away all your ethical, moral fiber. And so he comes into the room, and he stands at the end of the bed, and he looks at me there, sees me sweating, writhing, and cursing, and he says, "I bet you got a kidney stone." And I said, "Do you reckon, Spanky?" And he says, "Would you like some morphine?" And I said, "Yes." So, and then pretty soon the other paramedics came with the cot and everything, and they loaded me up and hauled me out, and I got real sick. I don't usually tell this, but I know that there are some EMT firefighters in the audience, and they appreciate this, and not, your average citizen doesn't get it, but I was that one rare patient who actually requested his emesis bag before he needed it. Emesis is a fancy word for puke. And usually you figure out that your patient needs it right about the time they puke on your boots. But I said to the guy, I still remember looking up at the guy going, "You got one of them convenience bags there?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "You probably want to get that out." So they hauled me to the hospital. It was pretty interesting because after 18 years of being an EMS, this was the first time I ever rode on the cot looking up. And they hauled me in and put me through a CAT scan. And a little while later, the ER doc came and found me in my bed there. And he said, "Well, as we suspected, I've looked at the CAT scan, it's kidney stone." He said, "You've got what we call a tweener." I remember thinking at the time, you know, exactly how many years of medical school? And he said, "Well, what I mean by that," he goes, "it's quite large." He said, "It's in that area, kind of in-between area, where there's about a 50-50 chance that if we gave you some pain meds and you drank a bunch of water, you might pass it." Or he said, we could just go up in after it. And I hadn't been working as a nurse for quite a while, but I had retained a pretty good understanding of fundamental anatomy. And when he said go in up after it, I'm familiar with the root. And I said, you know, let's go for a natural birth. So they sent me home with a whole bunch of Percocet and told me to drink a lot of water. And it didn't go well. It took me about 12 days to pass the thing. And when I got home, I, at the time, was living alone in an old house, and I have a little bedroom upstairs where I was doing my writing, and like a lot of old houses got very steep wooden stairs. And the Percocet really made me pretty woozy, and I was so concerned that I was going to fall down those stairs, and my EMT buddies would come and find me at the bottom of the stairs with a C-spine fracture crumpled in a Percocet haze. And so I took my laptop and my work, and I went out and stayed at my folks' farm for about a week. And this is just a quick little scene about how things went out there. I spent the week at my parents' farmhouse. Now and then the pain would outdistance the Percocet, and I'd try anything. Hot baths, microwaved hot packs, incessant pacing to distract myself until the drugs caught up. Once, I was crawling out of the bathtub when I was swept with nausea. I scrambled for the toilet. Hearing the scuffle, my mom burst in to check on me. And so it was that at the age of 37, I found myself buck naked on all fours, head in the toilet, puking at the feet of dear old Mom. She's been a nurse for 40 years and was unfazed, but a guy hopes for a little dignity. So I'm going to skip ahead now to what I refer to as the glorious conclusion. But before I do that, there are just a couple of little bits of information I have to give you so that the ending makes sense. And the first is that when you have a kidney stone, they want you to catch the kidney stone and keep it and bring it back in, and then they crush it, and based on the chemical analysis, they then give you dietary recommendations, which you then ignore. And in order to catch the kidney stone, when they send you home from the hospital, they give you a little plastic funnel. And at the bottom of the funnel, there's a screen. And there's really no delicate way to put this. You've got to pee through the funnel every time, everywhere. And as I wrote in the piece, that leads to problems, because you really can't stand at a urinal in the farm and fleet peeing through a funnel and expect to escape arrest or injury. So, there was an incident involving a logger, but anyway, the other thing that you need to know before I get to the end is that my urologist, which is a phrase, frankly, I never anticipated using. But my urologist is a smart guy, and I like that in a urologist. But he's kind of geeky, too, and overexcited. And he's kind of skinny and wears big glasses, and he gets really excited about kidney stones, to the point where it makes you a little bit uncomfortable. Because the first time I went in to see him, I sat down, and the RN came in. She took my vital signs and a health history, and then she said, well, the doctor will be with you shortly. And pretty soon he comes in, and he looks at my chart, and then he scoots his chair up kind of neat and neat with me and goes, okay, yes, kidney stone. Now, a kidney stone is not just a kidney stone. There are actually 19 variations of kidney stones. And I said, well, I've got the one that hurts. And he then proceeds to go through the 19 variations of kidney stones, describes their color, their shape, their size, and their different names, and he gets all the way to the end of this 5-minute disquisition on the 19 variations of kidney stones, and then he scoots forward a little more in his chair, and he says, Ann, last year at the American Association of Urologists Convention, they announced the discovery of a 20th variation. I said, well, man, that had to be the talk of the convention. So, just for the ending to make sense, you got to know that my urologist is a geek for renal calculi. This is the personal part. I was caught completely off guard when it finally happened. I was visiting friends. We were leaving to see a band, and I had run upstairs for a quick filtered pee. Urinating through a sifter was second nature by now, and my mind was somewhere else when, boing, There was a sudden rubbery back pressure. My urine flow stopped dead. My bladder expanded, then clack. And I was peeing effortlessly again. You know how sometimes if you turn the faucet off too quick, the pipes rattle? There's a term for that. It's called water hammer. When that kidney stone hit the home stretch, I had my own little water hammer moment. And now there it was, dark brown, rock hard, and the size of a choke cherry pit. I had a sudden urge to call friends. And hand out cigars. I went to my follow-up appointment. No sooner had he closed the examining room door than Dr. Renzepis turned to me eagerly. "Did you bring it?" It was like in third grade when Vinnie Bosco wondered if you brought the fart cushion. I pulled the specimen bottle from my pocket and held it up to view. The stone rattled against the plastic. Dr. Renzepis's eyes widened. "Oh my God!" Can I tell you what pride it gives a man? To produce an object in this manner and have a board-certified urologist say, "Oh my God." I averted my eyes and flushed with aw shucks pride. Just as quickly I drew back. "I bet you tell all your patients that." "Oh no," he said, that really is a big one. Stones of that size, we usually have to go in after them." I was glowing. I'm going to head towards the home stretch here with some things from Truck. I'm kind of watching the clock. I was told that at 9 o'clock they just cut the power to this place. So I don't want to run afoul of the librarians, because librarians have been good to me. This book, Truck, it's called Truck, A Love Story, and I get asked all the time in interviews if it's a love story about a truck or about a woman. And I always respond with a question of my own: is there not room enough in a man's heart for both? Answers vary. But on one hand, it was supposed to be a book about two things. And the first thing was, it's about the resurrection of a 1951 L120 3/4-ton long bed International Harvester pickup truck. And I love that truck. And that truck sat in my driveway for a long, I had it for 20-some years. It was my only vehicle. And it sat in my driveway for a long time and didn't run. And I kept thinking, I got to get to that truck, and I never did. So I'd like to read a scene from the book where I explain that this guy appeared, and I took it to be a sign. I think the only thing you need to know about this piece that I'm going to read is if any of you are familiar with Chippewa Falls. I mentioned Chippewa Falls in here, and you know, I have friends in Chippewa Falls. It's a lovely place. But I don't think they need to be putting on airs. Right? So, 2 winters back, a man knocked at my front door. I like to look folks over before I step into the open, so I paused a moment to study him from behind the glass. He had backed away from the porch and was standing on the short patch of sidewalk beside the driveway. My driveway could use some work. I'm no home improvement specialist, but I admit that if you have to mow your asphalt driveway, there's work to be done. When I opened the door, the man turned to look at me, but held his place on the walk. He had one eyeball smaller than the other. "That truck for sale?" He squeezed the small eyes shut when he talked. He was pointing at the old International Harvester pickup parked in my driveway. It's been there a while. The tires have formed depressions in the asphalt, and a sapling is growing through one wheel well. The sapling is 6 feet tall. and thick as a buggy whip. Sorry, no, I said. I got a 6-cylinder in it? Yep. I hoped he wouldn't get any more specific. My capacity for mechanical minutia doesn't go much past lug nuts. One question and he had nearly depleted the store of my knowledge regarding the engine. Embarrassing for a guy to have such affection for an old truck and yet know so little about it. I need that thing. It was a declaration, not a request. He trained his one-eyed stare directly at the truck. This buddy of mine's got a road grader. He put a 6-cylinder international engine in. Everybody told him, you can't run a grader with that little damn engine. He turned his face back to me and clamped the eye a little tighter. Hell, he can spin every wheel on that thing. He spit, poorly. A thin string of snooze trailed in the breeze and then snagged on the stubble of his chin. It was cold enough I expected the string to stiffen and hit the ground with a faint tinkle. Dropped that dang grader through the ice last week. Won't run for nothing. Engine shot. Thought maybe you'd sell yours. I scuffed my boot and shook my head. No, me and that truck go way back. I can't do it. The truck is unpainted, punched with dents, and runs heavy to rust. I've had it for just short of 20 years. Last time I got it running, maybe 6 years ago, the gas tank sprung a leak and all the fuel ran out. I have an abiding affection for the old truck. During several lean years, it was the only vehicle I owned. My relationship with the truck has outlasted 4 of my most enduring romances combined. An observation the parties now departed deserve to claim as a key element in their exoneration. I have watched that truck rust in a heap for far too long, and I want to hear it run again. I want to back it out the driveway, clunk the shifter into first gear, and double clutch my way through the gears until I'm blasting down 5 Mile Road like the old days. The truck is on my to-do list. I have a busted screen door on that to-do list. It's been flapping in the breeze since the Clinton administration. Don't the city give you no trouble just leaving it sit there like that? The man was really squinting at me now. Well, no. Well, it's a damn eyesore. I like to think of it as sort of a status symbol, I said. I was trying for a joke. The next door neighbors have a modest collection of decrepit beaters parked in and around their garage, and the house across the back alley could pass for a smallish salvage yard. Jiminy Christmas, I'm from Chippewa Falls. You'd never get away with that in Chippewa Falls. Well, la-dee-da. So this guy, I don't know, it seemed like, when he left, I thought, man, that was probably a sign from above. I really have to get serious. So the problem that I had was getting the truck run is that, as I said, I'm mechanically incompetent. And so I got my brother-in-law, Mark, to help me. And my brother-in-law, Mark, he became a big figure in the book then. And my brother-in-law, Mark, is one of these guys, he likes to, on the weekend, he likes to watch him some NASCAR while drinking a Busch beer and sitting in his recliner, which has been reupholstered in genuine tree bark camouflage fabric. It's true. But he's also an extremely talented machinist, and he spends his day making things that the rest of us use every day without even thinking about it. And he's also a great mechanic and a talented at doing body work and that sort of thing. And also, and most important to me, he is a good husband to my sister. And she, frankly, is no walk in the park. The family as a whole is grateful to him for the good work he does. But anyway, so he helped me because I just really don't know nothing. I grew up on a farm and I worked on a ranch in Wyoming. I've run equipment all my life, and I can change out a spun bearing, or I can run a gas hatchet, and I can do a little bubblegum welding. But really, once if you lift the hood, it's lefty loosey, righty tighty, and after that, But because of my background, I'm very comfortable in the milieu. I know how to act, and so like I can. My favorite phrase of all of guys in the shot, I can do the thing. You lift the hood, then you lean and scratch, and then after a while you straighten up. You go, yeah. Looks like we're gonna have to pull her. And I got no idea what you do with her once you pull her, but I know that's what you say. So anyway, Mark helped me, and that was great. I write about how how it was to spend time with him in his milieu, and basically hand him wrenches. I love his stoic outlook on life. His life's philosophy can be summed up in 3 words: walk it off. If you hit your knuckles on the carburetor, he says, walk it off. And if your wife runs off with the milkman, he says, walk it off. The other thing that the book was supposed to be about was, it is about a year in the life of my garden. I use the term life pretty irresponsibly there, but and the reason I wanted to write a gardening book is because I had it up to here with happy gardening books. I felt it was time for a grim gardening book, and I'm the guy to write it. So I'd like to share with you now, if I might, a little selection from the book. Then basically takes place where each chapter is a month. So I'd like to read a brief excerpt from the chapter about my very favorite gardening month of the year, January. Because that's when you order seeds, right? And then hopes are high. In part to mitigate the barren state of the earth, I have decided to order seeds for my garden. I possess the perfect armchair for the task, a saggy old green thing that came from my grandmother's basement and now sits on a rug beside my homemade bookshelves. Sinking into the worn cushions, I spend the remainder of the afternoon leafing through seed catalogs and recharging my chamomile tea. It is as if a sun lamp has been turned toward my soul. My winter-bound spirit thaws, releasing sense memories, the shink-shink sound of a hoe cleaving sandy soil, the press of a hard seed between the pad of thumb and forefinger, the scratchy hiss of squash leaves moving in a warm breeze. Seed catalogs are responsible for more unfulfilled fantasies than Enron and Playboy combined. Blissful though it is, the annual seed catalog review adds up to a perennial tradition of willful delusion. It begins responsibly enough, scientific approach and rigorous intent, as for example in the selection of beets. Notepad at hand, I calculate the harvest date of 53-day red aces as opposed to 60-day cylindras, factor in the hybrid vigor of the red ace, take into account the sliceability of the cylindra, cross-reference all results of the applicable hardiness zone, jot my selection in each pre-ruled columns, including item name, associated catalog number, and miscellaneous starred comments, and then move briskly on to a hard-eyed evaluation of kale. I am in essence a minor god, with plans for my few square feet of the earth. I shall sow and I shall reap. I am a catalyst in the cycle of life. I'm also distracted by all the pretty pictures. The seed catalog is printed on paper of the same texture as your gaudier supermarket tabloids, a stock perfectly suited for oversaturated photos of royal burgundy purple pod bush beans over fluffed sheaves of Savoy spinach and lurid tomato shots, with every fruity globe so taut and flawless it might have been snatched from the chest of a prefab starlet. Carrots are arranged in arresting bolts of orange. A neon splay of bright light Swiss chard vibrates like a beer sign in a health food store. Purpling stems of beet green plunge into the dusty lavender crown of the stout root, sliced open in one photograph to reveal a glistening, fine-grained core the color of deoxygenated blood. The play of sun and shadow on a grape-like cluster of sweet millions miniature tomatoes is so mustily conveyed that your parotids clench at the thought of the skin popping under the pressure of your molars and the subsequent sweet gush of pulp. A pair of bellboy peppers reflect the light with a blue tinge that suggests the exact feel of the cool green lobes against your palm, and I am drawn straight into summer. It is as if the catalog ink is spiked with chlorophyll. Rigorous intent begins to fray. Never shop for groceries on an empty stomach, they say. Corollary riff. Never order seeds when the world is frozen stiff and leafless. And then I talk about the fact that scientific process vaporizes the minute I hit the cucumber page, because all I want is a cucumber. But they got 13 variations of cucumbers, and they got the sweet slice hybrid, the fanfare, the Ashley, the Marketmore, the Cool Breeze, the County Fair hybrid, the Orient Express, and the Sweet Success, the Diva. And so you got to make a decision, and I just lock up at all the abundance of opportunity, and I wind up ordering 3 different kinds of cucumbers. And I said I checked my notes, and I see that I chose the Orient Express cucumber because the catalog copy said it would thrive on a trellis, and I have a trellis. Not the right model, as it turns out, but... But I have one more complaint about the cucumber page, and that is this. The seed catalogs promote several varieties of burpless cucumbers. I have yet to find one promoted as burpish. This is flatly a missed marketing opportunity. Among my rural and roughneck acquaintances are no small number of folks who not only savor the art of eructation, they cultivate it. There are guys on the fire department with a 3-octave range. I have seen a woman throw her head back beneath the Jamboree Days beer tent and let loose a burp so resonant polka dancers were moved to applause. There are people out here who would go out of their way to plant row on row of Burpmore hybrids, county fair honkers, and belching divas. Thanks. I'm going to wrap it up with a little section about strong women, and then I'll see if there are a couple of questions. I'm going to try to get back to the sign-in and stuff in time so that, as I said, they don't just lock us all in for the night. But I do want to make sure that I don't leave it out thinking. You have to understand that I spend about 90% of my time in a small, dark room all by myself. Frankly, that's better for all of us. And I ain't gonna lie to you, I like it in there. But honestly, it's truly overwhelming to see people take time out of all the things that are going on in the world to come to a library and listen to a writer talk. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I mean that on a number of levels. I mean that on the, I'm grateful to see that there are readers and that there are people who appreciate books. But I also say it as a, I'm a self-supporting freelance writer. I've been buying my own health insurance since 1992, and I got 2 little girls now, and I want to thank you so much. So thanks, I really do appreciate it. And if you want to keep up with what's going on, I got a website just like everybody else and their grandma, www.sneezingcow.com. So I'm just going to charge off into this last section. I wanted to write a section in the book about strong women, and I'm just going to dive in. I was raised by strong women. Of course, they could only do so much. I use the term raised in the perpetual sense because the work continues. There is my mother, of course, sentenced to nature's most blessed curse, in which the female is expected to give of her body and blood in the rearing of a creature bound to bring trouble on the house, not to mention the heart. A child is prayer and worry wrapped in a blanket. Tax deductible? Yes, but oh, the hidden costs. You might describe my mom as the valedictorian homecoming queen who wound up a God-fearing, homemade granola-slinging Florence Nightingale in a maxi skirt and construction boots stuck on a cow farm. Over the years, she has taken responsibility for the care and feeding of legions of children. Some conceived, some adopted, some fostered, some delivered by the county for the weekend, others for a lifetime. She is slight of build and, to use her phrase, just mortified by public attention. Thus, I write of her in only the broadest terms. But I have watched 3 firefighters rush to her with an unconscious baby and then enclose her in a semicircle of hulking apprehension while she calmly gets the kid breathing again. I have also seen her up to her elbow in the rear end of a sheep and giving rescue breaths to a newborn Holstein calf. Mind you, not simultaneously. For 40 years, she has raised a constantly fluctuating passel of tots, drawing on her wits 50-pound bags of oatmeal and a fistful of coupons the size of a bad Uno hand. There were undoubtedly sleepless nights, but she never betrayed them. For balance, I should also tell you she has imparted certain inefficiencies and weirdness, including an inability to focus in the midterm, short-term emergencies, like a laser, long-term dedication to principle and task, can do. Finish 1 load of clothes without being distracted by a mildewed Reader's Digest, the song of a wren, or the knowledge that the mail has arrived, not so much. She has given us a propensity for impromptu flop sweats, a family-wide trait. My Aunt Pam holds several world records, and a habit of flicking her hands against her legs when she is discomfited. Both my brother John and I have inherited versions of this last tic, effectively killing our chances of achieving success in the world of high-stakes poker, international espionage, or, for that matter, dentistry. My grandma Peterson lived in 14 different homes before she was 18. Then, after a brief marriage that didn't work out, she moved to a different town and married my grandfather. Not counting half a year spent living in motels, Grandpa moved her in and out of another 12 homes. Over this time, she raised 5 children of her own and took in another 28 foster children. She did her baking with a .22 rifle in hand and was known to step away from the stove to snipe feral cats and once an incautious woodchuck. My deer-slaying uncle used to wax a bit windy about his abilities as a marksman until the day Grandma took up arms out behind the barn and schooled him in a manner he will to this day not discuss. In my favorite snapshot of her, she is leaning over Dad's woodpile, detonating my brother's 5-foot-long black powder muzzleloader. The air is hung with smoke, and powder sparks are still arcing downward. I should add that she was scrupulously honest, deeply compassionate, and jumped rope until the age of at least 72. Grandma Perry burned at least 1 pack of Carltons a day, and on tough days knocked back a martini before supper. I recall her sticking her wadded Clark's Tea-Berry gum on the plasticine of the cigarette pack before lighting up, and my brother recently reminded me of the way she held the handle of her fishing reel between her thumb and 3rd finger so as to free up the index and middle finger for the ever-present heater. Sawed-off and short-tempered, she favored sayings like, "Well, hell up a tree," and "That woman could knock a bulldog off a gut wagon." And she once declared that a certain parsimonious fellow was tighter than a gnat's ass around a rain barrel. But the phrase she held closest to her heart still remains on the masthead of the local Humane Association she helped found, a voice for those who cannot speak. She was fierce on behalf of animals, from picking up local strays in her orange Plymouth Duster to serving as president of the State Humane Society. She had a way with human strays as well. The animal shelter employed its fair share of down and outers, and Grandma knew her way to the bail window of the county jail. I was present more than once when someone knocked on the door to reimburse her for covering their bond. She wrote heartfelt poetry, admired Albert Schweitzer, and spent her early married life alone, raising my father with Grandpa gone to the shores of Iwo Jima. Remaining within the family tree, there is my tiny Aunt Sal, so bow-legged she couldn't catch a pig in an alley. That's the sort of finely wrought observation that causes problems at family reunions. Aunt Mabel, 80 years old and currently charging off to every cultural event within a 50-mile radius of Spooner, Wisconsin, usually with a carload of restless contemporaries. Aunt Meg, who took time out between hairstyling and running her own cafe to drive an 18-wheeler, hauling corn syrup and refrigerated goods across the country behind a gigantic black Freightliner. Aunt Annie, who got all the cows milked before heading to the hospital, where she delivered baby number 3 directly upon arrival. I'm going to read one last section, brief selection, but I think now I'll stop and see if there are a couple of questions. They can be about writing, they can be about the books, they can be about my personal life, raising pigs, chickens, whatever you need to know. I'll take a shot. But yes.
Is that your truck out in the parking lot?
I have been told that there's a beautiful international pickup truck out in the parking lot, and I can't wait to see it, but it's not mine. Well, you know, people are always saying, you didn't bring the truck? Did you read the book? Because, I'm sorry, I'm going for the laugh. I didn't mean to be rude, but I love that truck to death, but it's got an effective radius of about 15 square miles, and it's a 3/4 ton International, and I just, I got kidney stone issues, all right? I don't. And furthermore, if it does break down in Janesville, who are you going to call? And apparently the guy who's got, or the man or woman who's got the truck here. So, no, it's not mine. Yes, in the back.
You miss writing about Roma pizza?
There's someone blast from the past. Someone just asked if I miss writing about Roma pizza. One of my finest lines ever crafted had to do with Roma. This is a person that used to do, she's a talented artist, and she used to do some artwork for, I had this buddy, he started a little advertising agency in Eau Claire, Wisconsin back when I was first starting out to write, and I was looking for any kind of work I could get. And one of the things I did is I wrote radio ads for a frozen pizza company called Roma Pizza. And long before Dairy Queen had their little rhyme, I wrote a radio ad that said, "When it's time to eatza, something Roma pizza," I remember. And they liked it so well that we made it into a television ad. I remember that. So I ain't gonna lie to you, I don't miss writing frozen pizza ads. So. But I ain't proud. I'd do it again if I have to, and that day could come. So nice to see you. Yes?
What were your reading habits as a young person?
I was a voracious reader, and I have to thank my mom. I was raised in an obscure fundamentalist Christian sect, and one of the rules there was you couldn't have television and you couldn't have radio, but we got books. And my mom took us to the library every week, and we had piles and piles of books. And I showed an interest early on in reading, and she was a reader. And I used to bug her, she said, when I was a little tot, to read to her. And one of the things that she did very early on is she would read to me. She made a deal, and she would read to me a chapter of Winnie the Pooh, the text-heavy version, not the picture version. And she'd read a chapter of that, and then she would hand me the book, and I had to sit there quietly while she read a chapter of her grown-up book to herself. And years later, I realized the wonder of that. She taught me to love sitting quietly with a book long before I could read it. And then when I was 4, she said I started to pick out words and stuff. And so she sent away to one of the Chicago newspapers and got a book on phonics and taught me to read when I was 4 using that book. And from then on, I just read anything to get my hands on. I know I did for a fact because 2 of my earliest reading memories are, we were a big poor farm family. When I say poor, I'm not looking, we never went to bed hungry, but we did have oatmeal every morning, except for a long stretch where one of the neighbors raised wheat, and my mom took a big plastic garbage barrel over to the gravity box and got a gravity a garbage pail full of wheat, and we had boiled wheat for months for breakfast because it was free. And but on Sunday, we got to have boxed cereal because we had to get ready to go to church, and that was the big treat. And I would read anything that was in front of me, and I know that because I remember two of my biggest words were niacin and riboflavin. And I was telling the students today that I really was a voracious reader, and when I say that any time I sat down or sat still I would read, I mean it, because to this day, from being in the bathroom when I was a kid, I think I can do this. I can recite, Crest has been shown to be an effective decay preventive dentifrice when used in a conscientiously applied program of oral hygiene. Yes.
Yes, I heard you yesterday on the radio.
Oh, jeepers.
WRT.
Oh.
Excellent. So could you tell the crowd about when you first heard radio?
Oh, when I first heard, yeah, part of being in this church that we weren't allowed to have radios in the house. And when I was, I've got to be careful because I wrote an essay about this and went back and verified the dates, so it might be, but I think when I was roughly 16, I was rummaging around in one of the closets, and I found my mom's old tube radio from when she was a kid, and I took it to my room and turned it on, and the tube's warm, literally, and on the first song I ever heard, certainly not the first song I ever heard, but in my house, came welling from the speakers was Rainbow Connection by Kermit the Frog. And I've since been able to track down just about exactly when that was, because it was a top 40 program, so I went back and found when that song charted and was able to narrow it down. So yeah, that was my initiation to music. So any other questions? Yes?
I just have to say that both in 485 and then I noticed it's in truck too, you had information about Trigby, your neighbor.
Yes.
That's my nephew.
Oh, well, he saves my life on a regular basis. Trigby, and I take the term nonfiction very seriously, by the way. That question comes up a lot. And if I do my utmost to get the facts right. Truth with a capital T, meaning of life, that's up to you. But if I say something happened, it happened. There are only two things I do. One is I change names of people. It's this thin veneer. When you come from the place I do, it doesn't help. I mean, in population 485, I have a friend, still friends with him. He just butchered my pigs for me. But he's a butcher, and he's got a severely crossed eye, and his nickname in real life is the One-Eyed Beagle. And I say, when you describe a guy in your book as a butcher named Bob the One-Eyed Beagle, who's got one eye, one kidney, and two ex-wives, both of whom work at the only gas station in town, but then you tell people, but his name isn't really Bob. How much cover have you really given? So the Trigby in question, his name isn't really Trigby, but he's a real guy, and he's absolutely, he's a computer genius, and he's bailed me out so many times. I view the computer as a typewriter, and he knows all that other stuff, the voodoo stuff. So maybe I'll take one more question, and then I'll close, if there is one. Otherwise, I'll just, yes?
Taking Irma out hunting this year?
Pardon?
Are you going to take Irma out hunting this year?
Am I going to take
Irma?
Irma? Oh.
Is she still roadworthy?
She's been out for both the last two hunting seasons. It's going to be a little tricky this year, depending on my schedule, because she developed a hemorrhage in the carburetor area. And I know what the problem is. I've identified it, and if I was a real man, I'd fix it in an afternoon. I've got it half apart. Now comes the tricky part. So it's a gasket issue, and I've pulled it apart. So if I can get it fixed before then, I'll take her hunting. Otherwise, I may just have to leave her home this year. But yeah, Irma's my truck.
Can I just ask you?
Oh, yes.
The love story is really your love story, isn't it?
Yes, and that what I was going to close with. Yeah, so then finally, the truck book is supposed to be, in the proposal, if you go back and read it, it was supposed to be about the resurrection of my truck, and it was supposed to be about my garden. But about 3 months into the writing of the book, and in my real life, I went to the library, and I met a woman. And I've told the American Library Association that they are free to use that quote in all of their promotional material. And So I'd been a bachelor for 30, well, by the time, I don't want to give away the ending of the book, but it's obvious, it's on my left hand, and I've been a bachelor for 39 years, and I talk about that in Population 45, about why I was a bachelor, and I was a happy bachelor. I was not a swinging bachelor, but I was content, and then I met this woman, and I was content to marry her, and she me, and I write, and I got some letters actually and emails after Population 45 of people saying, what do you have against marriage? And I'd always say, go back and read it again. I have nothing against marriage. I have great hope. Because I talk about my parents who are now entering their 5th decade of a beautiful marriage. I grew up watching my father treat my mother with reverence every day. And when I finally got married, I included that word in my vows specifically to honor my father. And so I was looking, I just wasn't desperate. But when I found that, and neither was she. Although some might argue that fact. We've been married just over 3 years now, and I'm on my 3rd wedding ring. I'm a tiny bit absent-minded, and I lost the first one. My dad's got sheep, and if you know anything about having sheep, lambing season is a real death march. You got to be out there every 2 hours, round the clock for 4 weeks straight. And last lambing season, my dad injured himself severely, and he couldn't walk. And so us kids took turns doing the lambing chores. And I went out to do the 2 a.m. shift. I got out there was a little sheep that had already delivered 2 lambs and had a 3rd one on the way. She was a young ewe, and I could see it was backwards. Breech, as they say in the business. And so I went in the house and I woke up Mom, because Mom handles all the obstetrics on the farm. But when I got out to the barn, she wasn't there yet, and it had progressed to the point where the little guy was hung up and the cord was being pinched, so I said, I'm going in. And so I did. And I delivered the little guy, and he wasn't breathing. But I did Lammy CPR, which you can really do, and glory be, he came around, he did just fine. So I was excited about that. I went back in the house and I was washing my hands, and I realized, oh my gosh, my wedding ring is gone. So I went immediately back out and I searched through all the straw and the assorted sheep byproduct, and I couldn't find it. And then I went back a couple days later with a metal detector, found an old nail and a rusty hinge, but I never found my wedding ring. And about a month later, some wise guy said, did you check inside the sheep? I did not think of that. But, you know, I said I'll tell Dad to keep an eye out. And, you know, maybe next year, a little miracle lammy, golden band around one of you. And then, because I lost the first one, and I lost one in the fire truck, because I always take my ring off when I go on fire calls, because there's a horrible injury called a ring avulsion, and anybody here who's been an EMT or nurse or worked now, you've seen them. It's where truckers get it a lot. They jump out of their truck and their ring gets hooked, and it literally pops your finger off. It's horrific. I was standing next to a friend of mine when he did this, and he's missing his finger to this day. And so I try to remember to take my finger, or take my ring off, but I always forget about it, and then the chief's call. So bottom line is, the rule at our house now is that Mike is not allowed to own any wedding ring that costs more than $14. And as a matter of fact, I bought my last wedding ring at a head shop in Eau Claire, Wisconsin for $9. And it's one of those ones where if you don't like the shape, you just kind of push on it. But yeah, I met this woman at the library, and even though I'd been a bachelor for a long time, it was very early on to me, it was evident that this was different. And I was very at peace with the idea that this could work. And about 3 months into it, I was holding her hand one day and looking into her eyes, and I said, I am at peace with this, and I am so at peace that I'm prepared to make a lifetime commitment. And she looked into my eyes and said, well, I'm going to see if we make it to 3 months, and then or 6 months, and then I'll give you some sort of feedback. As I said in the book, well, that was a rolled up newspaper to the snoot. But anyway, she hung in there, and now we're married, and I couldn't be happier. And we got 2 little girls. We got a 7-year-old. She had a 3-year-old girl when I met her, and she's 7 now, and helping feed the pigs, and in her ballet outfit, which I think is true. I was writing. I have a little place above the garage where I write, and I was writing one day, and I looked out, and there she went down to the hog pen with the pig slop, and she was wearing her ballerina outfit, and I thought, well, now there's your liberal arts education. And we got a little 7-month-old, and she's 2, and then I'm going to finish up here tonight and get on the road and go home and see them. I miss my kids. I'm going to close now, really, honestly, with a short piece that combines basically what the book is all about, pickup trucks and love. And when I was a kid, growing up, I did all my dating. I say it, all my dating, like there was a lot of it, but I did it in my dad's old farm truck, which was a Ford F-100 that had seen better days. In an effort to help me arrive at the age of 18, alive and financially solvent, my parents quite wisely forbade me to buy my own car while I was in high school, which meant I did a lot of dating in the F-100. By the time I got my license, the truck was entering its 2nd decade of hard labor. The side panels were ragged with rust and flapped like buzzard wings. As you gained speed, they flared. The truck pulled drastically to the right. I'd hang off the left side of the steering wheel to keep it moving on a straight line. The transmission, originally 3 on the tree, had been replaced at some point and converted to a stick shift accessed through a hole cut in the floor with a blowtorch. No one is clear on why, but the mechanic put the new transmission in backward so that the gear selection pattern was reversed. You had to go far right and back for first gear and then shift against your intuition. There was a gap in the floorboards beside the clutch through which you could gauge your speed based on the road blur. On the sharper turns, sheep ear tags and fencing staples shot across the dash. The brakes were inconsistent. Sometimes the pedal was as soft as squishing a plum. Other times, the brakes caught so abruptly that empty vaccine bottles rocketed from beneath the seat and smacked you in the ankle bone. Naturally, the windshield was cracked. The heater was passable, but in the summer, you'd rely on what a laughing bus driver once described to me as a 280 air conditioner. Roll down 2 windows and go 80 miles an hour. There were vents on either side of the cab at shin level, but to open them was to unleash a cyclone of alfalfa chaff and dehydrated horseflies. Picture your date. Perched beside you on a summer's day, her lips glistening with bubblegum lip smackers, and the cab charged with the scent of, gee, your hair smells terrific, shampoo. You're running 50 miles an hour down a gravel road when she grows overwarm and bends down to crack a vent. When she rears back, she appears to have emerged from a polluted wind tunnel. Her hair is frosted with feed dust, and she's got pine needles stuck in her banana clip. Her lips are dotted like twin strips of flypaper. And there is a June bug in her braces. You're young. You kiss her anyway. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all for coming. Remember, be a friend if you can. Again, thanks to Mike Perry. And there's books for sale at the back table. If you're ready, you can leave. You can walk up that way. You want to stack a chair in the corner? That's appreciated too. Thank you. Have a good evening.